This is not a recruitment podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Powered by People podcast. We are lucky enough to be joined by the wonderful Matthias Schmeißer, who is joining us from EMnify. He's recently joined EMnify. Obviously, Rex and I are here today. Matthias, why don't you shortly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for being here. My name is Matthias. I'm working in the talent space for some time, I would say over 10 years now, and in the last 4 to 5 years have been a talent acquisition leader. Have seen different size of organizations, like really, really small ones, seed ones, public companies, with 15,000 plus people, but also a little bit smaller ones, like 1,000 or 2,000 people. And now moving a little bit back again to the startup environment where I started my career, because I think all the learnings and knowledge that you gained over your career, you can literally now put this to value for those smaller organizations to build successful companies, tech companies in Germany.
Yeah, amazing. We're going to be talking a lot about potentially how we foresee the TA team in tech companies evolving over the coming years. There's a lot of talk around how AI can influence the sort of processes that we're currently operating in, and ultimately how the tech team, whether that's going to have more. The Powered by People podcast is all about how people power businesses, and obviously we want to explore how people can maintain control over the TA team, as opposed to having these long automated AI processes, I suppose.
Yeah.
That's what we believe anyway.
I mean, we've all got war stories of working in talent acquisition functions, which were pretty primitive, I guess, at the time. I think the first ever ATS I used was like, I think it was called Easy Access or something like that.
EB, yeah.
And that was like ancient at the time.
Lots of shortcuts on the keyboard.
Yeah, completely. What was your sort of first talent acquisition experience, if you're thinking about how much it's evolved to now?
I think the first one that I had with an agency when I really started my career as an intern, I think they had a kind of self-built software database, right? And then when I joined
self-built, does that mean Google Sheets?
No, it was really a software in that sense, but it was a huge database, nothing else. It had a search functionality, and then you build talent pools, literally. So the use case was there. We are working in the interim management business. That's literally something like, for people that don't know that term, it's we work with very experienced people that get self-employed after a certain period of time, and then help to do projects with companies in their change momentum, change processes, right? To drive this and to follow this through. And those people are moving around, right? Because they have projects 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and you need to update the database. There's nothing like a LinkedIn feed. There's updates immediately. You need to do this good old phone calling. How are you doing?
Are you still there?
Yeah. Control X search.
And so that was a pretty interesting start in my career, because I think I had the opportunity to talk to very knowledgeable people, right? People that have been in the industry, in their career sometime, have been successful as well. And then again, just listening to them and trying to understand what's next for them, what they're actually looking for, and so on, actually made me fall in love with recruitment. Yeah.
Oh, well. Brilliant. Yeah. I don't think it was that me and Harry actually met at our first experience in recruitment. And in terms of how talent acquisition has evolved, for me, at that time, this is sort of 2013 onward, it very much felt like at the start, talent acquisition was a task that you gave to someone in HR, and it was maybe 10-15% of their role.
Yeah.
And the idea of having a like full-time talent acquisition manager, it almost felt like that was, no, we don't do that here. That's something that big tech companies do in the US.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. You only had a HR person, and they would use agencies, or they would do a bit of recruitment, or it was actually down to the hiring managers for the most of the part. And now we see huge TA teams across the world, and actually it becoming, and we've talked about this a few times already, but actually how TA, talent acquisition, is becoming a genuine career path. Like people are considering the reason I believe is because now we're seeing people. You mentioned just earlier, can somebody from TA work their way into a CHRO role? I'm actually not sure if they could go into a CHR role, but they can go into a CTO role, which we're seeing now, a Chief Talent Officer, or a CPO role, which Chief People Officer. And we're seeing lots more people from talent acquisition move into VP People and further, because the responsibilities of a talent acquisition leader far outweigh just recruitment. Because to ensure that you're achieving your company's acquisition goals, you're looking at retention, you're looking at onboarding, which impacts retention, you're looking at employee engagement, which impacts retention, and attrition, and all of these things. Because if you can retain more people, you don't have to acquire more people, and that's part of talent acquisition as a whole. Yeah. What's your thoughts, Matthias?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the problem is here, we need in the last 10 or 15 years, I think probably we still need a different people function. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the rise of talent acquisition, and had the same experience like you. People said, if you want to make a career in HR, you start with recruiting, you do this a year or two, and then move in a proper role, like a real role. So get a real job. Get a real job. Yeah. So this is not something people do in full time. And then what was very interesting to see, if you see how the world has changed and how organizations and startups have seen that we need the right people to actually be successful. Then TA got a bigger voice in this and a bigger say. And I do think if we compare it to the normal HR person, I think when you look at HRS systems, for example, right, we store data there, and literally they go through a life cycle, right?
Yeah.
They go through the process, they go then the onboarding journey, and then at one point they end up in the company, and then everything that technology does is like, I want to take vacation, or here is my salary increase.
Yeah.
And then that's pretty much it. Like, of course, there are more features, right? Performance, topics, etc. But it's very linear, right? And I think the way we are going now into this next topic, evolution, and why talent acquisition people have a better or a bigger chance to actually become the head of such a people team is we are working very closely with the business together. Most of the time when we are working with the business, we understand why is this person, what is the person doing?
Yeah.
Where does the person create impact? So we are per default with the hiring managers much more closer into the real weeds of what this business does, what does it drive to be successful, etc. And so being so close to the business is then, of course, something that maybe traditional HR people are missing, right? Because they are concerned about their policies and,
it's more legal side of people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is one of the lessons learned in my career is when we say, if your legal team drives your communication strategy, it's safe. But in the end, it's not engaging, right? And so there's always a fine line between
every lawyer's doing marketing.
Yeah, but it's like it's a risk mitigation or it's a risk management, right? In the end of the day, it was a very popular action to do when I started my career in Berlin. Is don't give people feedback. It's dangerous to give people feedback. They can sue us. They can sue, and so this is true. Per default, they can, and there's a risk. But in my whole career, and I've been doing this now for a couple of years, it's like I have never seen somebody sue me. So, I mean, this whole topic of like, it's up there and we need to be aware of and so on. I mean, if you're a decent human being and you have some structure in place, you can tell people, and the most common thing is probably, hey, we interviewed 2 or 3 people, they were a bit stronger because of this and that. Sorry, right? And then give them a little bit more advice. I think when we create candidate experience, it's like also one of the topics that everybody talks about, but nobody masters, is if you create a learning momentum for people in the process, so that they can take something out of this process and learn something from the time they have invested in talking to you, this is the momentum where, can really drive a meaningful conversation and a great experience because they get something out of it, right?
Yeah.
It's a return on investment. How many times do you spend time in an interview and then say, oh, good Lord, I already know that the person doesn't know what they were asking. They don't know.
5 seconds in, you knew they weren't right for the role.
And this is a challenge. I think we most of the time talk about talent attraction and branding and so on. But the real problem right now, I feel, is we are doing a poor job in assessing candidates. So that's why we don't know what good looks like. And that's why we probably talk to the right people, but we're doing a not so good job in understanding what is needed to actually be successful in this company.
Yeah, could be very, very true. I think it's company to company, varies. I often find that this understanding of what good looks like can be improved by the relationship that you have with either your hiring manager or stakeholder. If you have a really good relationship with hiring managers and you're able to collaborate more effectively with them, then you are able to have a deeper conversation. Some hiring managers I've found don't value recruitment. It's go and find me those people, thanks. Whereas if they value you and your role, and they give you more time and attention to understand the role in a better way, you're better able to understand what good looks like so that you can vet a lot more efficiently in the process.
I think that's changing quickly.
Yeah.
And that comes with the professionalization of talent acquisition and prop function. I mean,
as a career choice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Last year, I was fortunate to go to RecFest and Tech Rec. Now, Tech Rec was a 2-day intensive conference, I guess you would call it. And everybody left with full notepads. There are just so many insightful topics to get into with experts around talent, obviously experience, D&I hiring, early stage careers, best practice, data, branding, like all of these, like even tooling, all of these topics were something that would just not have been on the radar like 5+ years ago. And RecFest was very much the same until about 4 p.m. And then I think everybody was having a beer and waiting for the DJ.
Yeah. Have you been to RecFest yet?
Yeah, and there was one in the UK.
Yeah.
So I had this opportunity. My experience was I had a really good 30 minutes talk from one of the thought leaders there. And that ruined it for me because everybody else after that was
not good.
So in the morning, I just choose the wrong conversation, the wrong talk, and suddenly everything else was okay.
That one was so good.
Yeah, but it happens, right? Because it depends. I think the opportunity in such events is not just to listen to what people have to say, but also to network.
100%.
To network, to get into the right conversations, asking the right questions, because you don't know sometimes what you don't know, right? And I think
unconscious incompetence.
Yeah. And also I think sometimes it's not a bias, but it's like this cognitive dissonance. Like if you are very much into this topic of, hey, I believe I'm right. This is where I think, I nailed it. And then somebody else has a completely different opinion. And these times, I think we should do this much more. And I see a pattern here that we don't have the tough conversations anymore. Also between us, the professionals in our area, to say, hey, are you really sure this is the right way? Yeah, and tell me why. Yeah,
you can get very tunnel visioned on your idea, can't you?
Yeah.
And then letting other people in is a difficult process, a difficult thing for people to learn to do.
Yeah.
There's so much more.
I struggle.
There's so much more engagement now among different people in talent acquisition that there is a lot more like knowledge sharing, and hopefully that's going to reduce these silos of information where people get trapped in habits.
Yeah.
But that's it. It's an interesting one because when we talk about a lot of these topics, they actually transcend into different areas of the business, and it's quite a well-trodden statistic. I think everyone's probably heard of it before, where CEOs say that 70% 70% of CEOs say that hiring people is the most important and hardest part of...
The hardest part, yeah.
Yeah. So...
Particularly now when VCs throw you 50 million quid quite easily, and then the whole objective of that money is to grow.
Could be, yeah.
Just grow. And there's not enough people out there to grow these tech companies.
Yeah, so I guess if like RecFest and TechRec bring us up to speed, with that, I guess, better understanding of the value of TA, where does this sort of leave us in terms of the direction of TA evolving in the future? Like, where's our value going to be? How are we going to see it evolve? I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that, Matthias.
Yeah, I think still that we are not that far that everybody of the business understands our value. Yeah. Why would I say this? If I'd be really harsh now, as if we see all the layoffs that are happening, were we not part of the problem here? First of all, and second of all, so many people in our profession don't have a job at the minute. Yeah, and there are great people out there. So the question is, why is this happening? Yeah. Why are decision makers, when a company is struggling or is not doing well? I mean, still most of the companies that did the layoffs still exist, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like they're completely broken or bankrupt, right? But then the question is, if they need to make a decision who to let go, why is talent acquisition,
always the first?
Branding, D&I, topics that are affected, right? So let's look at the latest news, right? Facebook says we need to lay off 10,000 people again. And one of the first sentences is half of the recruitment team is gone. Yeah. So the question is, why is this?
Yeah.
Why we are seen as like, okay, we're not gonna go crazy on growing the company. That's why we don't need recruitment. Yeah. We can also take other examples and don't just make, Meta here part of this conversation, but also Spotify. There are a lot of people in the talent team. Yeah. So the question is here a little bit like, why are these things happening? And my assumption is that the value is not understood, right?
Yeah.
It's a very narrow understanding of talent acquisition as we bring people to companies and that's it, period.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's no topics around how can we evolve our talent and people practices, how we can coach and enable stakeholders, how do we actually, create an employer brand. This is not a 6 weeks task. This is a 2 years approach, or even 3 years, depending a little bit where you're coming from. How you can, make leaders better leaders. How do we think about this whole topic of org design? Yeah, it completely disappeared from the expertise of people teams. In the past, when I started to, study this, human resource management, org design, org development was one part of the trajectory of people teams. Nowadays, what the leaders do is like, oh, I need to hire 100 people. How does my future org structure look like? And they do it on their Miro board, right?
Yeah.
Without even asking anyone, right? And so I think this is the piece. The problem is when the decisions are made or need to be made, are we part of that round? Are we in that seat on the table?
Yeah,
are we driving the right decision for the organization by being there?
I think that's really interesting because actually, when you think about it, perhaps the best time to look at all those topics is when you're not desperate to hire, because your back's against the wall and you need to be executing, not planning at that point. So when you're looking at topics like operational efficiency, that is actually your chance to maybe refocus what the TA team is focused on for the build back, if you like.
I think Matthias is right. I think, the earlier on in the conversation of building a business's strategic plan we can be involved in, the better, right? So, the C-suite are going to sit around and talk about, we want to achieve these commercial objectives, and an absolute, must have in all of those objectives, whatever they are, is people. And to increase your revenues, the likelihood is you're going to have to increase your headcount. And by how much is depending on how aggressive your commercial goals are. And if we're at that table, we can be advising, and maybe the C-suite take the advice or not. But if they have outrageous objectives commercially that the TA function is simply not going to be able to deliver on, then it's pointless having the commercial objectives in the first place, right? And so by having these conversations, if it's sustainable or not, is it achievable or not, what can we be doing now in order to sort of future-proof these commercial objectives from a TA perspective? The earlier on we can get involved in those conversations, the better.
Yeah, I think it's also the way of how do you make decisions and how do you solve problems. I think if you still under this assumption that throwing money and people at problems is getting you far, and this is definitely something that didn't work, right? I think when we talk about it, I think I really liked your part here where you said we have aggressive commercial goals. Now the question should be asked, how do you achieve them to the leaders, right?
Yeah.
It's not just, growing the organization. And then you should also ask them, okay, let's just assume I bring you 100 people by tomorrow. How do you do onboarding? Time for interviewing. When is the return of investment there, right?
How do we get them? How do we make them productive?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, this is like, and how long will that take? I see sometimes, and that's something that, I think was also maybe a mistake in the last 2 years now, is when people have tremendous, outrageous hiring goals. Just re-engineer how much time you need from the business in order to achieve this. And then go back to the C-level and say, listen, if you want to hire so many people, this is the amount of time I need from you. And this is the amount of time where your guys don't do anything else. They're not creating impact. They're not creating revenue. They just are there to hire and work with me on those pipelines. That's it. Do you want to do this?
Yeah.
And I think this is something where we might be a little bit poor in terms of as a decision maker. So let's assume we're all CEOs. We don't want to be confronted with problems. We want to be confronted with
solution,
right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing what I want is then I want to have different options. Yeah. I want you to tell me what are my options? Yeah, what are my options? Is it plan A? Plan A is so and so much cost. Is it plan B? Less costs but more quality. Yeah, right? Like slower. Or is it plan C? Something completely different. I think so and so many times I don't see enough conversations that we are having now right away. Is what kind of technology do you buy to scale your to achieve your goals, your business goals? How do you do this? Is this just manual labor? Or is this actually something where we smart about, right?
Yeah.
And I think so and so many times these conversations also should come from the talent acquisition leader, the recruitment leader, even if it's a little bit beyond their scope. But to ask those questions is really meaningful, right?
Yeah.
And then we go back to are we asking the right questions? Yeah.
Well, that's it. I was just going to say, I think that with a lot of the things that we've seen in recent times, as talent acquisition leaders, we are slightly guilty in the sense that we were really needed at that time. And the idea of it's kind of like a paradox. On the one hand, we want to push back. On the other hand, when somebody says that they want to hire 200 people, we feel like we are so needed that at that time we sort of jump on the chance without questioning it, because all of a sudden you're an extremely important person in the organization. And also it could be a bit about self-belief as TA leaders. Maybe you know these things, but you're not communicating because you don't necessarily you don't necessarily feel like you can have the impact.
So is that self-belief, or is that the business giving you the platform?
Bit of both. I think that the rest of the business is unconscious of these topics that you're the knowledge expert in, and you're not educating anyone else in the business around it. You're just seeing the attractive side of, I can make 200 hires in the next 6 months. This is like a nice flagship project in my resume. I'm going to do that, not necessarily thinking about the aftermath.
I think I've talked to a few people within the sort of TA leadership world as well about actual competency modeling and what businesses are doing in order to actually upskill recruiters, talent partners, talent business partners, because I think that's probably an area that we lack quite a lot. If we're talking a lot about how we can have impact across a variety of topics within a business to add more value than just recruitment, but what are the learning and development team doing to support a recruiter in upskilling them in these areas? If we maybe we're lucky enough in this room to have been involved in lots of employer branding topics and engagement topics, but other recruiters won't have been. And so how are they going to have impact or add value in these areas if we're not giving them the skills and the chances to get involved in it?
I think it starts already when you build your team, right? I think a lot of people I hear in the industry saying, "Oh, I need generalists," right?
Yeah.
I need a lot of generalists, and then I'm equipped for every topic that might come up, right? And I would disagree to a very certain extent. I think we need more specialists, not generalists, because in the end of the day, every time I entered a company, it was always about we need to change something.
Yeah.
And then the first thing that you should have as a discussion, talking about asking the right questions, is asking the C-level to say, what does change management mean for you, right?
Yeah.
What is it? How do you execute it? What does it mean? What is the history of the company with change, et cetera, et cetera. And so on. So many times when we are confronted with, hey, recruiting is not working for some reason, it's most of the time, no, it's actually a cultural problem.
Yeah.
It's actually a leadership problem, right? So there's a certain reason why recruitment is not working well, because people are having other side stories that are not tackled. And I think this is something where we have seen, and also maybe need to look at the external effects that we have in the market right now, is that when we talk about employer branding, a lot of people only talk externally, which is we are creating an image that actually doesn't exist in the company. And we are happy with it.
Too often.
Yeah. We put diverse people on a job ad because we know if we put diverse people on the job ad, the chances are higher that diverse people apply. But those diverse people come in a non-inclusive environment where they are set up for failure.
100%.
So we are doing poor employer branding because we are not focusing on developing the internal employer brand first to get buy-in from the business, from the people that are there, in order to then sell or create.
Sell that. And also, it then becomes so much more buyable or sellable because it's authentic. You know, like if you
don't have to sell it.
You don't have to sell it, because the brand just automatically, people start understanding that is the brand. You don't have to put a picture up of certain people to say this is what we look like internally. And often if you do that, it doesn't necessarily come across as authentic either.
Yeah, and I think this is something where when we talk about evolution of our concepts, is we shouldn't always talk about it like we nailed it all, right? I think we do not. There are so many things that are not working well, and everybody is still fine with it, right? Because I have a great LinkedIn campaign, I have a great career page that doesn't reflect my company at all, but it looks great, right? It's shiny, it's fancy, and literally when you do you need to do it one day if you have time. Check out career pages. It's awful how they look like. Yeah. We still have the same job ad concept in 80% of all the career pages that also win awards, right? It's a text. It's nothing else. There is no design behind it. There is no opportunity to make this more appealing. We have, again, 500 bullet points, and everybody believes, that's the way forward. And we all know that we discriminate diverse talents because, for example, women, if they don't fulfill 80% or 90% of those bullet points, they don't apply, where men is like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I know the job title, that's good enough, right?
I think I've got an agile mindset.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is really something where, these are best practices that are unused, that are not really executed well. And I think for me, this is something where we maybe even need to hold our professionals, our people that we know of, accountable for actually, hey, Matthias, if you go now after this session to my career page and say, great conversation in the podcast, but actually, what are you doing? Yeah. It's a mess, right? So hold them accountable for what they actually say, and say maybe there's a situation where what they say and what they do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm worried about whatever email I'm going to get from Matthias after this podcast. But it's interesting because we talked about how far we've come, but as soon as you start to pull at the strings and dive down the rabbit holes, you can see how much evolution is still to come. It's actually really exciting, so I think that's quite interesting.
I think one thing I was going to mention there actually is we've got to be careful not to vilify as well as a general society. If a business came out to say we are not diverse, and actually this is something that we want to work on, we want to create more inclusion internally, in order, and then we want to create, more processes to enable a more diverse workforce. But we understand we're not there yet. Some companies are scared to say that, because then it's like, well, you should be diverse. Yeah, I know, we get that, and we're going to try and work on that. But at the moment, we're not. And it's okay. It's okay to talk about things that you're not, I think.
Yeah, no, 100%. I agree. I think, let's be honest, look at Berlin, right? It's a great example. If you look at Berlin and you have spent some time in the city, it's a wonderful city. It has diverse people here. We have lots of different communities. You don't need to speak German or English in the city to survive. You can speak Spanish, Italian, Turkish, whatever. Yeah, Berlin is the second biggest Turkish city in the world. Yeah,
really?
Yeah, it is.
That's insane.
And so there is a huge bunch of diversity on the streets, on the clubs, on the cafes, wherever you go. But when you then look at the companies, and look at the C-level, senior leadership, look at the podcast right now. 3 white males.
We have a female producer, Rosie.
but again, right? Point. So I think this is where I'm like, no, we are not diverse. We are not diverse in a diverse city, which is so weird, right? And it's because of I think in the end of the day with this whole diversity topic is like, I think a lot of people still don't get the use case right, the business case right? What a lot of people know is, the more diverse people I have, the more work it is. Need to communicate much, much more than if I have the same people with the same mindset sitting there, going out of a meeting and say, yeah, see you tomorrow, Matthias, you know what I want, right? Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And so this is of course complex, right? But then again, and this gives us or drives us back to this whole topic around, yes, are diverse teams more successful, or are diverse companies more successful than others? I think this is not bought yet. Not bought into a lot of different use cases where people might say, you know what, makes complete sense.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it is, maybe that is it. You need to talk to more people about the business case. I read a really interesting book about a Malaysian banker. And Malaysia is an interesting country because, broadly speaking, it does have like 3 main ethnic groups. You have Chinese ethnic Malaysians, you have Malay ethnic Malaysians, you have Indian ethnic Malaysians. And as far back as the 80s, he basically started working in a very, I think it was quite a Malay environment. And he made it more of a Malaysian environment. So very early on, he always had much more of an even spread of people coming from different backgrounds. And that bank grew into a huge Southeast Asian regional player faster than any other bank because it just meant there were more perspectives, more viewpoints, more...
That's it. Diversity of thought.
Diversity of thought.
Is what you really want, People often think that they've ticked a box with... different physicalities of diversity, but it's diversity of thought. There's lots of different brackets. There's age. We often don't think about age as a diversity bracket, but somebody who's older has a whole different thought pattern to a lot of founders and co-founders in their mid-20s, and hiring people from an age diversity bracket is going to give you a whole nother perspective, and I think maybe this is why we struggle with diversities, because do we want to be challenged? We have to really ask ourselves that question. Do we actually, I know we say we want diversity, but do we actually want to be challenged? Because that's what diversity is there to bring, is to bring somebody who's going to say, you're wrong. We should look at it in this way. And that's difficult for some, I think.
Yeah, and I also would argue another thing that is is not helping us as professionals as well is I see this more and more happen that, it's a fun topic to jump on, right? D&I is important. It's on everybody's mind. Everybody has different opinions about it. But if it becomes a personal agenda for yourself to say, I want to do this because I believe in it, but I cannot actually explain to the business why it's meaningful
or important,
yeah, then you're set up for failure.
100%.
And we need to make sure that we have the people that do the right things for the right reasons, and they are explicit about it, and not just say, I do this because I believe in it, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
I think, and this is something where I sometimes say, before I do a big D&I campaign, I rather get my hands dirty and hire a diverse leader or a diverse talent than let my action speaks for themselves, build that use case, see what they have changed, and then go to the board and say, listen, do you think we should actually continue doing this? Yeah, because that's more meaningful and more impactful than just saying, oh, well, it looks nice from the outside.
Yeah.
I think this is something where I still see this, we are lacking in this. And then also I think what is very frustrating, at least from what I recognized as well, is a lot of diverse talents also lost their jobs, right?
Yeah.
So this whole topic when, we had Black Lives Matters movement and everything else, it was a huge hype topic. Now I came across somebody saying, I wanted to speak on a conference about this topic, and the conference said, no, it's not important anymore. So that's
so
like people's minds is off this topic now. It's why should
you have to have a global campaign to make people listen.
All of these, for me, the business case, a lot of the time, obviously it's case specific, is about leadership, having voices around them that challenge their thought process, and that's because there's strength in basically more brains are better than fewer in terms of finding consensus. But it's not natural human behavior to surround yourself with people who are going to disagree with you.
Yeah, and it's the learning process. I think sometimes what I learned for myself in my career, I always ask myself when I change a new job, what do I know? Like, do I actually know that much? And then a lot of people would be like, yeah, Matthias, all over the place, podcast, whatever, you probably most knowledgeable person in the world. But like in the end of the day, you need to be humble to say, I'm going to learn from everyone else every day, right? You never stop learning. And I think this learning attitude, you need to have to actually stay up to speed. I mean, we are now getting older. Now this thing called TikTok comes around and you'd be like, what kind of channel is this? Or is even YouTube my go-to social media channel? I mean, we probably all know in this room the time when smartphones were not there, where we set up meetings with our friends and said, you be there at 4 and you need to show up, right? Otherwise you're not there. And I mean, like this whole thing has changed now where we're like, am I getting what they're actually trying to do here? Like, what's it all about, right? Yeah. And I think this is something where I'm just saying this learning mindset is something that for leaders is really, really important, because the more diverse your team gets as well, not just from thoughts, but also from skills, et cetera, you will create your own learning environment.
Yeah.
With that, right? And this is really important. And so many times what I've heard from other talent acquisition, like professionals or leaders or recruiters, they say, Matthias, I sometimes are not even allowed to speak up, to ask questions. Get your stuff done, produce those numbers, I don't care. Yeah. So what kind of, going back now to the topic, what kind of culture as talent acquisition leaders do we need to actually foster and ensure to have an impactful recruitment team also in this organization? If we struggle to not create an environment for innovation and speak up culture and inclusion in our teams, then we are not making impact here.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because one of the things I was thinking about when we were talking about this topic before the podcast was like the scenario of how would it look if, or can you imagine when a founder gets pre-seed and they're looking around to find co-founders and hire the first people around them, and their first hire is a talent acquisition expert. And the reason why I thought of that just now is because you talked about maybe like setting the right tone from the beginning in terms of an organization's culture and identity and structure. And as we all know, it's harder to make those changes the bigger a company gets. So it's that whole thing of a bigger ship is harder to steer. And if you've got like an expert from the beginning who's thinking about D&I from day one, you're going to find it easier than necessarily attracting somebody who doesn't look like the company further down the line.
Yeah. And not just this, I think the bigger impact would probably be that we all know in the beginning of a company, I know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody, and then we have this like-minded network that we refer people from and believe, he was fantastic. Yeah, I know him as well. He's also fantastic. And then you have a bunch of friends working together, which is, don't get me wrong, if you have 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 people, It could be the great time of your life, right? Because everybody is, like-minded, knows each other, great. But this is also then the dangerous part, right? Because I have seen the moment when you have a structured interview, you can compare candidates, you can choose a little bit, and you just don't trust like your next network and so on. You will already make a difference, right? And then I think this is something what I think with diverse talents is the biggest problem is, do they actually have a chance to perform? Are we actually giving them a chance? When we talk about talk times, how much does a woman speak compared to a man in an interview, right?
Yeah.
How do they speak about success differently, right? So I don't want to make this as a gender topic here, but I think in general there are so many little pieces that need to be tied together in order to actually set them up for success.
Yeah, but I think if, for example, a lot of the time when you have a co-founder, the first hires they want to make are like a principal engineer and maybe like a COO. And if you had a talent acquisition leader from day dot, one, you'd probably be more on top of topics like that.
You'd find better people. Those founding members would probably be better.
You won't pay a massive agency fee for those people.
Yeah.
You'll find a better leadership team afterwards. Then you also have somebody who can
shoot himself out of a job here, Rex.
Yeah, I know. But you also have the option then to sort of grow the right way and comfortably, so you maybe can have more of an educated conversation when that next round of venture capital money comes, and can push back on when they're saying, we need you to make this many hires by this time. It's like, well, we can do that, but these are the consequences.
Yeah. You could even be in a better position to achieve a round of funding because you've got a better people strategy. You've set up that initial founding team simply. You've got a nice employer brand or an EVP, different stages of an EVP even set up. You've got a hiring strategy, and you've pipelined the next 10 hires, and if you've got that, you've got your LinkedIn. How many companies do we know that don't even have a LinkedIn set up? And you've got all of these things positioned so that when a VC is looking at your business, they can see that you're in a position to scale already.
Yeah. And I also think you don't put yourself out of a job here because you're part of the solution, right? So I would assume that if you have a capable leader that understands what are my options, then you're one option.
Yeah.
Hey, if we need to move past, how many times is it that, I think a lot of times it is like this, that people C-level come up and say, I need 50 people tomorrow. And suddenly the talent team is like, yeah, but then we need 2 or 3 more recruiters. We're going to do this. What would that mean? So in these conversations to say, what happens if I get 2 or 3 more million, and we would invest this in our hiring strategy? What would that do to us?
Yeah.
Can we even do this? What can we, talk to investors about it? When can we promise them?
What can we achieve with this money? Yeah.
So this is really important because then I think nowadays when we look at this market right now, I still would assume even layoffs will happen and will continue to happen. And we see companies go out of business for sure. It's still going to happen. But I would also say with the challenges right now, we don't have fully staffed talent acquisition teams.
Yep.
And one day or another, topics will happen to pick up again, right? And then you guys are needed because they cannot wait until they hire their whole complete teams again.
Yeah.
So the question is, this is also a big dangerous topic with all the technology that we buy these days. If nobody's managing those technologies, right, and doesn't understand them well, then what do we do? Yeah, probably then next round they would look at user adoption and say, nobody's using this tool. Why do we pay for it? It's out.
Yep. Because it was TA teams that were using it.
So the question is, in this environment that we are in right now, it's very fragile, right?
Yeah.
And it's something where again, what is the value? What is the value to understand? Especially in the past when you come into a new organization and there's a change momentum, something was not working, right? Most of the time when I get my job, somebody messed up beforehand, or the whole team messed up beforehand, and then you have burning grounds, right? So people are like, don't come with D&I again. People are like, hiring process, I have my own process.
Yeah.
Why do you come here and streamline this?
Yeah.
Can you show me the data? No. Oh, interesting. Do you believe it works? No. Yeah. So there are topics like that where I'm like, this is this change momentum where I'd be like, okay, we need to really make sure that we ask the right questions and position ourselves there in order to set people up for success and be that flexible, right? Because this is what happens on the C-level table. They say, if I get from my investors 2 or 3 million more, what does that mean? Think about the ventures. They still need to invest. They still need to hit their quotas.
Yeah.
The money is there. It's not like it's not there.
Yeah.
They're keeping it so long because they want to invest in real sustainable companies, and everybody else that is struggling on the way is great because they're not going to invest in them.
Yeah. Matthias, we have a closing tradition on this podcast where we ask the previous guest to write a question for the next guest. So this question was written by Ehab from Delivery Hero. And he asks, so you've been at EMnify now for just over 9 months, right? And he asks, if you were to rejoin EMnify, what would you do differently compared to what you've done in the last 9 months?
Yeah, good question. Thank you for that question.
Basically say, what have you done wrong?
Yeah, well, I mean...
What have you fucked up in the last 9 months?
Well, not so much, because otherwise I would not.
Didn't pass probation.
Yeah, I did pass probation. Yeah, congrats. So no, I think what is always challenging, and I think this is something what happened to me when I came in the first day, completely jumped into the first meeting. Right? Hey, we are the CTO organization. We want to hire those roles. Please help. So that means what I'm trying to say. There was a sense of urgency where we needed to act fast.
Yeah.
We achieved it. Everybody's happy now. We really made that contribution, and this is where it's the first trust standing that you build.
Yeah.
But I think what was not done very well, and what I definitely would change, is taking people along that journey. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In change management, when you do things differently and you need to act fast. Yeah. You don't have time to take so much people along that journey.
Yeah, that's true.
So that means, what I mean by that is, okay, I kind of have a sit down with the VP of engineering and discuss their technical hiring process. He was very much opinionated that he has the best process in the world. We realized after 90 minutes, he doesn't have the best process in the world, and we need completely to change that, right? Now, it's great that I and we both agree on this. But then, okay, there are hiring managers, his directs, their interviewers. Yep. So actually you need to, I wouldn't say we are a big company, but like we need to do a little roadshow.
Yeah.
Create that buy-in. Yeah, people feel comfortable with it. Yeah. Then say, hey, how experienced do you feel with hiring and interviewing? What is something that you need? Then do a coaching, do a training, enable people. We all didn't do that.
Because you would just act.
Because we just said, we believe the problem, and this was the problem statement, the assumption, we believe the problem is that we cannot attract the right people. And that was wrong. We got the right people. We were just not very capable of assessing them in a way.
Yeah.
And again, which leads to, are people enabled to coach, to do this, right? So I think...
there's an assumption often with business that hiring managers know how to interview because they're hiring managers.
Yeah.
I've met so many hiring managers that ask, humbly, am I doing this right?
Yeah.
Is this a good way to interview?
Epic Games are like famous for having awesome hiring managers.
Really?
Recruitment, which just makes recruitment for them so much easier.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I can show you a C-level report, a leadership report. It's a global one, over 100 countries, whatever, right? 90,000, 100,000 people, where leadership rated themselves to actually be confident of assessing and hiring people with 25%. So that means that
doesn't surprise me either.
No, it doesn't. Yeah. It doesn't. But we assume, right? We so many times assume that people know what they need to do.
100%.
And I think what we have at the moment as well in our organization is, how do we design the best tech challenges? Yeah, even if we have a fancy tool. And you will not imagine how much of a discussion this is, right?
Yeah.
Because some people might believe, being a little bit longer in the organization, and of course knowing the organization very well, it's totally okay to ask somebody to put 10, 15, or 20 hours in a tech challenge.
Yeah.
Where you be like, wait a minute. They have a job, they have a family, they have a life. When are they supposed to do this? Yeah, but I would expect if somebody wants to work with me, he needs to be an evangelist. Well, wait a minute. Yeah. So I think I'm not making fun of those people. I'm really saying, like, is this mindset of trying to understand what is realistic and what not?
Yeah.
How do we match the market and what is required on the market and the best practices that are out there and execute them? So that is something I would definitely change and spend more time to take people along the journey in order to create more learnings on the way.
And get buy-in, and two, create probably more sustainable processes longer term, because then everyone, now you've got through the urgency piece, and now you can go back and start working on upskilling and improving and gaining buy-in. But if you did it along the way, there would have been more hockey stick learning, and you would have had a better, potentially longer term buy-in.
Yeah. Perhaps you didn't have you maybe didn't have the privilege of time when you began as well. But if for example, you'd had a long run up and you known about hiring plans that were coming up, back to our topic we were speaking about earlier, in times where there's less hiring, you can address these issues.
Exactly. And here's my point, where we are in this momentum now, where we have the opportunity to not have so much pressure on our hiring goals, but then can do this. So from a strategic standpoint, it's also a little bit like, okay, what does the company need now most, and what kind of team do I have available?
Yeah, for sure.
Because in the end of the day, let's say the truth here. I'm not doing all of the work alone. Right?
No, of course.
There's a team behind it. There are people that are skilled behind it, that have that expertise or not, right? And to be fair, on half of my team was freelancer driven and
Really, yes.
Yeah. So I just now, when everybody laid off people, actually hired my team. As literally did it completely the opposite way. But we believe that, even if we have less hiring to do, we still have the right professionals that help us to create.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, Matthias, thanks ever so much for joining us on this podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
We're going to ask you to write down a question for our next guest.
Do you want to do it or just do it blind?
We'll do it blind.
Do it blind, yeah.
But thanks everyone for joining us, and have a great day.
Cheers.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap.